the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, mass market morning stars hit the target, pass through, and take out the minions beyond. Vapid vampire blood and antediluvian floods, plus we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. This time we have part one of an interview with Eric Flint and Charles E. Gannon talking about 1637, No Peace Beyond the Line, the latest entry in the Ring of Fire alternate history series created by Eric Flint. This is about the West Virginia coal mining town that gets thrown back into the past in Europe. This one follows the adventure of uptimer Captain Eddie Cantrell and Admiral Maarten van Tromp as they face down the Spanish Navy in the Caribbean and try to establish an age with some equality 300 years earlier, while at the same time turning a profit for the United States of Europe and the Dutch. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Now here's the news. The November Baen eBooks Leap into Liaden sale continues. Sharon Lee and Steve Miller's wonderful Liaden series is on sale throughout November in ebook form. You can get $2 off accepting the Lance, which is regularly $6.99, and it's on sale for $4.99 all month long. Plus, all the other Liaden series ebooks, all of them, are $1 off all the way through the end of November. Available wherever Baen ebooks are sold. That's Amazon and all the other outlets, as well as at Baen.com. Hey, the Baen November mass market editions are out and at booksellers everywhere. Speaking of that Leap into Liaden ebook sale, out in mass market now is Accepting the Lance by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. Exiled from Liad after bombing a city to save it from the Department of the Interior's infernal weapons and plans, Clan Corval has gone to the ground on the backwater planet Surebleak, whose people are as untamed as its weather. But the Department of the Interior is not done with Clan Corval yet, and Surebleak and Corval ships and people everywhere are in its crosshairs. Also out in mass market edition in November is Antediluvian by Will McCarthy. In a brilliant and dangerous brain-hacking experiment, Harv Lionel and Tara Mukijira are about to discover entire lifetimes of human memory coded in our genes and reveal ancient legends, from knights and trolls to flood myths to the birth of humanity itself, that are very, very real and very deadly. Finally out now is The Best of Jerry Pournelle, edited by John F. Carr. For nearly half a century, Jerry Pournelle's name has been synonymous with hard-hitting, idea-driven, wonder-inducing science fiction. Now, for the first time, Pournelle's best short work is collected together in a single volume. Here are over a dozen short stories, each with a new introduction by editor and longtime Pournelle assistant, John F. Carr. Best of Jerry Pournelle, edited by John F. Carr, Antediluvian by Will McCarthy, and Accepting the Lance by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller are now in mass market editions at booksellers everywhere. Check them out. This is part one of a two-part interview with Eric Flint and Charles E. Gannon discussing 1637, No Peace Beyond the Line. Part 2 will be available next time on the podcast. I want to welcome Eric Flint and Charles E. Gannon to the podcast. Hello, Eric and Chuck. Back.
Hello, how you doing?
Eric Flint is a modern master of alternate history fiction and lots of other things. With 3 million books in print, he's the author, created probably more like 4 now, 5 of the multiple New York Times bestselling Ring of Fire series, starting with the first novel, 1632, and building up to the one we're going to talk about today. With David Drake, he has written 6 popular novels in the Belisarius alternate Roman history series, and with David Weber, collaborated on the Crown of Slaves sub-series and the Honor Harrington big gigantic series, and just enormous amount of other books. It would take us all day to list. Lots and lots of stuff. Eric was for many years also a labor union activist who lives near Chicago, Illinois, but in the meaningless state of Indiana, where his vote doesn't count. Charles E. Gannon. Chuck is the author of the Compton Crook. Is the author of the Compton Crook award-winning Nebula-nominated Kane Riordan series, starting with first entry, Fire with Fire. Now we are up to, I think it's book 5, Mark of Cain. He is the co-author with Eric Flint of 1636, The Papal Stakes, 1636, Commander Cantrell in the West Indies. There's another.
Vatican Sanctions.
1636,
The Vatican Sanctions, yeah. Steve White, co-author of the Starfire series entries that he's done, and he is the author of multiple short stories, some really great short stories and novellas as well, and a bunch of other stuff. He is a member of Sigma, the SF think tank, and has advised various intelligence and defense agencies since the start of the millennium. A former professor, Chuck now lives in Annapolis, Maryland, with his wife and children. Out now at booksellers is 1637, No Peace Beyond the Line, the latest entry. Here it is, beautiful Tom Kidd cover, as usual. The latest entry in the Ring of Fire series and the sequel. This is the follow-up book to 1636, Commander Cantrell in the West Indies. So let's talk about that. Captain Eddie Cantrell and Admiral Maarten van Tromp are back, raising hell in the Caribbean, separately sailing about. Eddie's in the Intrepid, and Tromp's got a fleet. Tell us where we are in the story, who these people represent, and sort of set up as we're starting with the observation blimp, and why are they there? They're off the coast of Dominica.
Dominica, yes.
Yeah.
You or me, Eric?
Hi, you.
Okay. So, at any rate, about at this point, 4 or 5 months have passed since the last events. Commander Cantrell. They are where they are, facing right out into the depths of the Atlantic at Dominica, because this is where historically La Flota, the big fleet from Spain, would come every year. And no one's expecting this because they're doing something that no one has done before, which is almost everybody tried to catch La Flota on the way out, because that's when it had the silver.
Going east.
Pardon me?
Going
east, yeah. Exactly. Following the Atlantic current. But at this particular point, you're talking about a very fledgling colonies, short on everything. Dutch colonies in a couple of islands, predominantly centered on Saint Eustatia, and the brainstorm comes up. Wait a minute, actually, this would be a lot more valuable to us if we got it coming in. We need those supplies, because that's what La Flota brought in. It brought supplies to everything along the Spanish Main, to Jamaica, to Hispaniola, to Puerto Rico, to Cuba, and then all the way up the Texas coast, although there wasn't a lot on the Texas coast before it. So it was empty, gathering silver, gathered at Havana, and then eventually went on back to the New World. No one ever thought about stealing it for gunpowder and nails and food and all that sort of stuff. Well, these guys do, and so they have because of the books from, once again, that pesky high school library in Grantville. They've got a pretty good idea of where it's going to come. They've got observation balloons up. They've got ships that are able to talk to each other by radio. So they've got a very big catcher's mitt, if you will, in terms of how the fleet would come in. And they have a lot of surprises for it. And I won't say anything more than that.
What gives them the right to attack Spanish shipping?
This is 1632. Who needs a damn right?
Please, it's in the title, okay? No
Yeah.
peace beyond the line. Officially, the United States of Europe and Spain are sort of at peace. Although I'm not sure they ever actually signed a peace treaty, but in any event, hostilities have ceased in Europe for the moment. But it was the Spanish themselves who always had the attitude that the Treaty of Tordesillas, which the Pope created, drew a line down the Western Hemisphere, and the Pope declared that everything west of the line was Spanish and everything on the other side was Portuguese. But the Spanish attitude was always that if you crossed the line, there was no peace beyond the line, no matter, what treaties might exist in Europe. And so in the New World, the forces of the USC in practice are at war with Spain in alliance with the Dutch forces, which officially and in theory are not actually forces of the Netherlands. They're an independent fleet under the control of Admiral Tromp. And the reason he can get away with that is because he originally took his fleet, what was left of it, to the New World after the Battle of Dunkirk, where the Spanish, along with the French, defeated the Dutch because of French treachery. And so he has never officially given his allegiance to the new government in the Netherlands that was created when the Spanish reconquered it.
Now that is historical, right?
No,
That's
Spanish were never able to reconquer the Netherlands. That's the big change we made. The Spanish were never able to conquer the seven Dutch.
That's where they spent all their gold, trying to constantly trying to take the Netherlands. Yeah.
Of men's lives, not to mention they killed a lot of people on the other side. But in real history, they always were able to hold on to the southern Netherlands, which today is called Belgium, but they were never able to reconquer the seven Dutch provinces. What happens in 1633, the second novel in the series, is that the younger brother of the King of Spain, who was then called Don Fernando, or the Cardinal Infante, he was a bishop officially, he actually does manage to reconquer the Netherlands, the Dutch provinces, except he's stymied at Amsterdam. He can't take Amsterdam. And without taking Amsterdam, especially after the USC defeats the League of Ostend in the novel 1634, the Baltic War, yes, people should be reading all these books. What happens then is that the Don Fernando in the Netherlands realizes that if he doesn't cut a deal with the Dutch, with the Prince of Orange, then he's going to be driven out sooner or later because the USC armies will come in. So what he does is he and the Prince of Orange cut a deal where they reunify the Netherlands, but religious freedom is guaranteed. And in addition, the Dutch provinces have autonomy internally. So anyway, that's the background. But the point is, Trump is still officially not under the rule of the King of the Netherlands. Although in practice, he is. It's just that it's a very informal arrangement because the king in the Netherlands does not want to have to go to war with his older brother, the King of Spain. And for his own reasons, the King of Spain doesn't have to go to war with his younger brother because he's got enough grief on his plate because of all the events that were depicted in other novels in the series, two of which Chuck and I wrote, which has to do with what Cardinal Borgia did by declaring himself the new Pope in Italy. Anyway, I know it's complicated, but that is the background.
Trump is kind of freelancing.
Yes,
in a way.
In practice, yeah. Officially, he's a freelancer who's allied with the USC forces in the New World, who are under sort of the command of Eddie Cantrell. Eddie's, remind me, Chuck, who is Eddie's not actually.
Well, he is now. The problem was that the person who was sent over was, and I pulled historicals pretty much right and left, even down to some junior officers. But Prosmund was I believe a Danish, Swedish, no, Danish. He was a Danish captain of this time, and he is killed in the first book, both because he's trying to score points with the king to make his wife happy. and also because as is the case, and it was, I think, important to show this, the downtimers their most advanced individuals have received training on the steamships, and he's put in command of one of the steamships. But just because you know how it works in principle, and just because you've taken it through some trials, that doesn't mean that you really will be able to sort of work to the nuances of it in a sort of in actual what I will call naval combined arms, which is kind of a contradiction in terms, but there are a lot of moving pieces, and there are so many new pieces that he does not understand, that he puts himself in unnecessary hazard for a variety of reasons, and he winds up paying the price with his life. Once he dies, and then there's another ranking individual who is really not in line for it, a guy by the name of Ovegede, who is actually another historical, quite an explorer, not so much a military captain, who constantly in the course of the first book is deferring to Eddie. He will step in and take control at certain key moments, but he becomes invaluable in terms of training new mariners, because that's one of the things they're doing. They are expanding their naval capacity.
Yeah, that's an important part of the book. Is this training is this part, sort of the secret weapon that Eddie has.
Absolutely. One of the things that shows up in this book and will show up in the eventual follow-on to this, which is tentatively titled "War to the Knife," is about that the Dutch and the Venetians, probably of just about anybody right now in Europe, are the ones who are already embracing a certain kind of method about producing things, training people, integrating different systems. If you were to take a look at what the Venetians at this time, their rate of being able to produce galleys and the way they did it, Henry Ford may have invented the industrial assembly line, but the Venetians really started that critter off. And the Dutch that are currently there are sort of seeing the system, if you will, and they are just they're buying into that big time, and that is making you're absolutely right. You know, a lot of people will want to focus on the size of the guns and the size of the ships and how fast they go, but there's a deeper issue going on, and it is that training and it is that sense of method.
Yeah, and the integration of the uptimer technology that they've been able to develop with the method is really cool. The way that y'all work it out. So set up the geopolitics a little bit more, because I know what Eric really wants to do is eliminate slavery. So
he ain't alone. He ain't alone. I got
if you came back in time, if you were thrown back in time, and you happened to sail the Caribbean and you knew that there was going to be slaves and sugar and plantations and all that, you might want to do that, right?
Well, here's the thing. The 3,500 approximately Americans that came through the time transposition in the town of Granville, partly because it's a West Virginia town, given the history of West Virginia, but I think it would be true of Americans pretty much any part of the country, have a very definite attitude towards slavery that comes from the history of the United States. And I don't really want to go through that again. The problem, though, is they're in Europe, and they are completely engrossed in the process of doing what they can to contribute to building a democratic society in Central Europe. And that's the reality of life. You know, how much of an impact they can have on what's happening in the Atlantic and in the New World, the coast of Africa, from where they are, you know, there are limits to what they can do in the real world. So they are trying in various ways to figure out ways they can have an impact on it. And one of the ways is what it develops in the course of the whole series of stories. And it's not just these two novels. I just finished well, I haven't quite finished it because I got to wait for a couple more things to come in, but it's going to be a long novella or short novel that I'm doing with Gorkoff and Paula Goodlett that's set in New Amsterdam, right around the same time as our novel. That has to do with how the Dutch are developing there. But one of the things they do is, because of the close relations the United States of Europe has with the Dutch, And the fact that for their own reasons, the Netherlands, and that includes King Fernando, want to stay on good terms with the United States of Europe, for the good and simple reason, if no other, that's the one country that could crush them if they really went at it. So they want to stay on good terms, and besides which there are a lot of commercial advantages. And so they are pressuring the Dutch, the Netherlanders, to outlaw slavery in the New World because they have leverage over it. And for various reasons, some of which are explained in this novel, some of which are going to be explained later, the Netherlanders are open to that. And it helps that the admiral in Tromp himself is anti-slavery.
Not just anti-slavery, but he was actually a slave.
He was himself
in the sense of more hostage for ransom twice by the Tunisian Algerian pirates.
Yeah.
So he has a very personal stake in this.
Right. And we are, don't forget, we're at a stage in history, 1630s, where slavery in the slave trade is still, except for the Spanish and Portuguese, it's very much in its infancy. It's not, you can't really say it's in its infancy in the Spanish and Portuguese territories. It's a little further along than that, but it's nothing like what it became, say 100 years later, or even half a century later. And so
the main instigators are the Spanish, and so they are the bad guys in a way because of.
They are the bad guys for a whole lot of reasons, a lot of which have to do with the position they occupy in Europe. You don't have to vilify the Spanish in this period to just recognize the fact that they were, if you're trying to advance the world in general and Europe in particular along the lines of a more democratic society, the Spanish are not your friends. Let's put it that way. I think that's fair to say that the Spanish monarchy is not going to be in favor of that in any way, shape, or form. And they are very powerful. So you're going to wind up in conflict with them.
Who else is there? So we have the French somewhere, and we have we got the Dutch, and the Danes.
Well, you've got in addition to the Danes, you've also got through the Danes late come along with the Swedes. They essentially come over as part of the USE, which is a bit of a tangle to begin with. But also one of the things that was sort of a godsend to the Dutch, and also for the dramatic scope of the novel, is that when the English, who are also part of the traitorous hordes at the Battle of Ostend, or Battle of Dunkirk rather, the English, as you may remember, Charles cedes all the New World holdings. Now, there's later argument about who meant exactly what, but the properties in the Caribbean at this point are completely cut loose on their own. And there are some fairly sizable properties in the Caribbean at this point. St. Kitts has a very decent population at this point. Barbados has a considerable population, and so does Bermuda. While not considered in the Caribbean, well, it's on the way to only two places, there and the mainland. And all of these have been cut loose, totally cut loose. So there's a natural alliance of need that comes along there. And I would say it doesn't hurt that the, if you will, the new lingua franca is Amadeutsch, and the Americans can shift into English of their version very, very quickly. And that, I think, so that you've got a bunch of things that made it a natural sort of coalescence of these were sort of poker chips laying on the table because, the player left and the new players come and say, oh, for me, and do so. So you do have a lot of people in play there. And it would probably be very wrong to ignore the fact that you have the memory. So you've got the Kalinaga, you've got all the native peoples.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So talk about the indigenous cultures that are there, because you did a great job of painting the interaction between the Europeans and these cultures. And I mean, it's a major part of the book.
It is, and it's a major strategic part of the book, and it follows on actually from Commander Cantrell, because one of the major individuals we see representing the native peoples, not in the political sense, but in that's that character, you know, that's in that sort of negotiation tete-a-tete with Eddie Cantrell early on, was from the first book, and is also again is a historical. There is a Tigraman who was the one killed in St. Kitts. Very interesting stories behind that. I mean, the history of this area is bloody, and because the victors changed so often, you don't even get the uniformity of narrative that you get when you say victors write the history. Well, so many of these islands changed hands so very often that the history that's come to us is kind of like a patchwork quilt of anecdotes and references, and we really don't know who did what to whom. But the chief of the Kalinago on what we would call Guadeloupe, because it would be French, so I'm sorry about my Spanish pronunciation there, is representing the Kalinago, who are related to, but not exactly part of the Arawak people, who are essentially peoples who came up from South America and sort of rolled through the Caribbean and displaced a group called the Taino. Now, the Taino, of course, if you think that Spanish treatment of their imported slaves was bad, you really want to simply enter these three words in a Google search. Spanish, Taino, which is spelled T-A-I-N-O, and genocide. The Taino population was predominantly on Hispaniola, so Haiti and Dominican Republic. And they were wiped out, and the numbers that you're talking about that were wiped out were there, even by modern standards. You kind of wonder how they got around to all that. I mean, it's just the number of Spanish there and the methods at their disposal. You look at the numbers and you say, my God, it must have been a nonstop killing spree. And so all of this is very much in play, because all of this is the Taino. They only sort of disappeared as a force 100 years ago, and there are many of their descendants all over these islands, and they remember. So this was how can I put it? I'm never going to say this was fun to play with, but it was rich, fertile narrative soil in which to take a look at a part of the world and a time of the world where there was an opportunity here for Grantville, as Eric was saying, to make a difference. And if they were thinking, you know, the cotton plantations of the South, actually at this point, the numbers of the New World, the natives that have been killed, the Aboriginal peoples, it is simply astounding, and all of that is sort of in play. So that is a very major part of the book, and it dovetails into is it about slavery in the model we think about it? Yes, but it really is about freedom versus slavery, period. And in that book, this was very gratifying. Let me not say fun. This was very gratifying to write, particularly some of the scenes between the slaveholders, the Dutch slaveholders on St. Eustatia, and the if you will, proto-abolitionists who don't even realize they're going to be abolitionists. In many cases, the royalty, the young royalty and aristocratic women who've come over from Denmark, and they get incensed, partially because they know what it's like to be chattel too. They're you know, advantageous marriage chess pieces, and they say it's not, our lives are not at risk or anything like that, but we know what it's like not to be masters of our own destiny. Severity is the difference, and it's a big difference, but we understand that. And that created for me some of the scenes I least foresaw, and was most gratified writing.
Yeah. Well, my favorite part of the book is whenever Europeans and the Indians are talking. with each other because they're trying to grasp each other's culture and they don't quite have a handle on it. Eddie is particularly good at sort of bridging this. That's his one of his big skills.
One of the things that's it's going to come more to the fore in later volumes of the series, but one of the things, there are two things about the real history of the New World that the Americans in Granville would like to at least ameliorate. In the case of slavery, hopefully just eradicate it. But the other one is what happened to the indigenous populations, which most Americans don't feel really good about. You know, and they don't. I mean, it's, I don't know, I can't think of anybody I've ever met who's proud of the Trail of Tears. You know, or who doesn't think that it was an atrocity. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody somewhere, but there aren't very many. But it's a very tricky issue of, well, okay, but how do you stop that? Because the fact is the old world is now in contact with the new world, and it has been for, what, a century and a half by now. There's no way to roll that back. Most of the death due to disease has actually already happened. There will continue to be epidemics, but the really terrible epidemics happened pretty early on after the contact because there was no resistance whatsoever to them.
And also because that initial contact was frequently with very dense emerald populations.
Yes.
Whereas when it hit the Iroquois, I mean, it might decimate a town or two, but they were so dispersed, it didn't have that it didn't reach critical mass.
Right.
It was like 90% of the population was wiped out by European disease.
Well, I've never bought that. And I'll tell
No,
you,
you don't? Okay.
No, I don't believe those figures. The reason I don't is here's what happens really with epidemics or pandemics, is the really dangerous ones are the ones that kill off about a third of the population because they keep spreading, like the bubonic plague. The ones that are so virulent, like Ebola, will kill off 90% of the people. Ebola doesn't tend to spread because it burns out so quickly. Yep. And what happens is surrounding villages practice quarantine, and they practice it very ruthlessly. It's like, you know, sorry, you guys are sick, but you're not leaving that village, and if you try, we'll kill you. And so something like Ebola, diseases that have 90% rates are actually not the ones that tend to become giant epidemics. So I've always been skeptical of those figures.
Yet at the same time, you know, smallpox is kind of sui generis.
No, look, you don't. You have.
I'm not going to argue with it. All right, Eric, you're right.
You know, all this, but I'm just saying that never mind. This gets us into a whole.
But I completely, But anyway, there was Europeans got them coming and going.
A long time about the population figures in a new world and so forth. But the point is that there's no way you can at this point stop it. It's simply impossible. But the question is, what can you do to at least ameliorate it? And there's two things that at least that are the main hero of the series, Mike Stearns, has figured out from the beginning. One of them is do whatever you can to make sure that no one European power has a really big dominant position in North America, because it was when the English became the English and essentially were just able to sweep over the continent, that at that point, for one thing, the native tribes can't play Europeans off against each other, which they were quite good at doing prior to that, and vice versa. But the other reason you get an enormous wave of settlers, that after a while, it was the settlers that made the whole thing impossible to deal with because the numbers were just so huge. You know, I mean, at a certain point, it just, you know, Indians just got overwhelmed. I mean, it was that simple. If you can keep everything dispersed so that, you know, there's contact, but it's going to take longer, it's going to be more complex, it's going to be less of a juggernaut kind of effect, then you're giving some time at least for the cultural adjustment to take place, and hopefully whatever emerges will be better than what actually happened in real history.
And it helps.
And I think there's a, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tony.
And it helps if you know the future because you've come from.
Oh, sure, of course. Yeah.
And I think another thing, another thing that is frequently, folks say, well, why didn't those Native Americans figure it out faster? And the bottom line is, how can you really imagine it? If you ascribe to the notion that there was the mound builders, right, in roughly the middle in the Mississippi, and we know about the Mayans, we know about the Aztecs. There were a couple of huge centers which were sort of, rumored to be, they were immense, they were considered unusual, they were it wasn't like that the ground was littered with them. And I think that one of the things that could happen here, and it has to do with what Eric was saying about buying time, is not very many people from that culture ever were taken to Europe to see what it was like and to understand when Europeans would talk about cities. And it was not just one or two, but particularly when you got on the continent, it was one after another, after another, after another. And the ability to imagine numbers, and I think this is for whatever its failings or benefits may be, you still see it's convincingly portrayed. And there's a lot that suggests that this is not totally ahistorical in Dances with Wolves, when our sort of our lead Native American says to our protagonist, how many are coming? And he says, like the stars in the sky.
Yeah.
And that's the only way to describe it. That this model, there's an inability to imagine that a world could be so different, which, by the way, for me, was like, I would find myself, you were talking about writing the sort of the indigenous European and American contact. It's a lot, some of my work in science fiction with writing first contact novels certainly stood me in good stead, because it's really what's going on at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that's different in the 1632 universe is that Native Americans, more of them do get to know Europe quicker, and they get to read Granville books. So there are now some who do know what at least one possible future would be. And some of them stay in Europe, but some of them are coming back, determined to try to do something about it. It's a fascinating fictional universe to work in, but it's complicated. And one of the things we've tried very hard to do in the series is keep it realistic in the sense of not making things Pollyannish. I mean, what's really likely to happen, or at least plausible to happen.
And you also don't give them easy technological solutions that a mining town from West Virginia wouldn't have.
Yeah,
Right.
It's well, I mean, Chuck's made this point any number of times, that the biggest single thing that came through the future had the impact was the books in the libraries. I mean, it's just, and what astonishes the Americans is the books that had the most impact aren't the technical books, and the ones that they're the history books, because everybody wants to go read them so they can think they can hopefully predict or guide themselves in the future.
Nostradamus.
That what they do discombobulates it, so there's not going to be any magical solution to it. It's fun to write, though. It really is.
It absolutely is. And one of the things that I like about it, which you don't find, I think, in a lot of alternate histories, not naming any in particular, is that I think the series in some degree thrives on paying very close attention to the law of unintended consequences. Mm-hmm. When, not to spoil anything for anybody, but when you get to the end of this book, not only does the pressure that's been exerted upon the Dutch landholders, which came over through the 19 Heron, the Dutch West India Company, they realize they're getting pushed out one way or the other. The answer they find to that, the allies they make as a result of that, and how that is informed by the history that was, usually history has been on the side of the good guys. Not this time. As I like to say, you could look at the model of Southern slavery and piracy and things like that, as all the things to defeat, or depending on your moral and ethical template, you could see that as a business model.
It's like pretty good ideas. Let's, I never
Yeah,
thought of that slavery thing before.
They didn't realize what was going to go wrong if they'd only put all these pieces together. And I am really looking forward to that, because if you think the Spanish are bad, holy gosh, as Eric was saying, the Spanish to some degree, look, you could make them out to be bad guys and gals, but really, you're talking about Reconquista is not so far in the past. You are talking about a nation that probably owed its survival to a highly militarized, absolute hierarchy that was able to marshal these forces to take its country back. And what a surprise that it became the primary hotbed of, when you get right down to it, counter-reformation. And all of the other sort of rigidities that we see. It's survived. All it's doing, it's like any creature that said, wow, we survived. What are our survival traits? The problem is income, these 3,500 troublesome individuals from the future, which basically have the news flash, if you want to boil down to it, is, Age of Enlightenment and Age of Reason works good, and do good. And these are, I think it was Heidegger who said the tragedy is defined by two characters whose objectives directly preclude each other. And I think that there's a cultural preclusion that's being played out between the emphasis and impulses brought in by the uptimers and Spain. And they represent sort of extremes on either end of a spectrum.
Yeah, it's like warriors, blood and honor versus merchants and freedom.
And so I don't really see it as beating up on the Spanish, but they are the creatures. They are creatures of the system that help them survive as a nation, and that doesn't let go very quickly.
Mm. Well, let's return to the story, if y'all don't mind, to talk about Eddie Cantrell a little bit. Tell us about his character. Now, he has found a girl, and a good part of this book is that developing relationship.
You found a girl. What is it? There's the John Lennon lyric, or perhaps she found, or I should say, she found me, because you got to wonder about that. Yeah. But I'll let Eric, because Eric was the one that kicked off the Eddie Cantrell story.
I have to say that one of the parts of writing this series I enjoyed the most was developing the relationship between Eddie and Aunt Catherine in 1634 to Baltimore, and just developing this West Virginia kid who's finding himself involved with the daughter of the king of Denmark. And she's something of a Valkyrie. I had a lot of fun with that. That was really enjoyable. But Eddie's an interesting character. We've had two major characters in the series who start as teenage, not quite boys, because they're both 18 by the time we first encounter them in 1632. But Jeff Higgins and Eddie Cantrell, their two friends wind up being killed. One of them in 1633 and the other in Ottoman onslaught, if I recall correctly. But they were never major characters. But Eddie and Jeff wind up becoming, you're dealing with these two American teenage boys who wind up in very different ways. Both of them following military careers, very different ones, and getting involved, but the axis around which their evolution takes place, is their romantic involvement with a particular woman. And in the case of Jeff, it's Gretchen Richter. In the case of Eddie Cantrell, it's Anne Catherine, the daughter.
Two wilting wallflowers, if ever existed.
Yeah, I know. And they're both extremely dynamic women, but they're about as different as you could imagine in other respects. One of them is royalty, the other is very much not. And it's just been fun developing those characters and watching them grow. And they're both, it's something I personally believe is that many people, I don't know if I go so far as say most people, but many people, it's not that particularly rare. If you give them the opportunity, will usually rise to the circumstances, or at least go a damn long ways. And you particularly tend to see that in time of war, because it's the reason I tend to write so much of my fiction takes place in time of war. And I don't consider myself a military SF writer, although I do write a lot of military stuff. But I like to set stories in time of war because you've got people under so much stress and strain that you can develop them in broader, brighter colors and remaining realistic. I mean, there are all kinds of ways.
The stakes don't get any higher than that.
Well, that, and also the opportunities people have to, you know, there are, you know, and then when peace arrives, they may, especially if it's a well-established, settled society, they'll probably fade back into relative obscurity. But during the time of conflict, they can, you know, I mean, all you got to do is read, for instance, any histories of World War II, and you will find all kinds of characters in there that are just immensely impressive, and you know, and rose to what are really terrible conditions, but they rose to the challenge. And that's what you're seeing with different ways about Jeff and Eddie.
What is what all right, so Eddie and first of all, like and Catherine, how do they get together? Because Eddie's out on a boat. He's on the Intrepid fighting.
You gotta go back early. You gotta go back to.
Well, I mean, how do they physically get it on? Because they get it on a lot in this book.
Well, look, they have their own cabin, for Pete's sake, and you know, I mean, he's an officer, and she is the queen or the daughter. She's not the princess because she's not in line of succession, but she is the queen's daughter. Our king's daughter, rather. And, you know, I'm sure they manage. And you know what? In fiction, you don't really have to go all the way down to that level of detail.
Yeah. Well, there is.
Although I do on several occasions.
Well, you certainly imply a lot of bouncing.
Book, of course, Anne Catherine is sort of, she is forced to be reckoned with increasingly in the life and the political life of Oranjestad she
has a role on land,
and basically that is evolving into it has evolved into their base enough that they, by the end of the book, as people will see when they read it, there's enough foresight to realize we have too many of our eggs in one basket here, and there are steps being taken towards that. But what it means is that every time Eddie is coming back from one of his missions or assignments, they are in fact co-locating, cohabitating, and co-everything elsing. So there you go.
There's a definite feel of influence. I don't know if you admit it or not, but it certainly felt like a hornblower, beat to quarters feel here, because that's the story of beat to quarters in the romantic thing, is that hornblower falls for one of the Wesley sisters, right?
I got to tell you, I only read the first two books, so I don't know. So if it was influence, it was that one time when I was playing around with a Ouija board, I guess, because I've not read the books.
It isn't in the following sense that first of all, they're both very, very, and I give all credit to Chuck for this. Thankfully, he had to do the research and the work, not me. Which is the very detailed depiction of the actual nautical side of sailing and warfare in times of sailing. Now, granted, they do have some engine power that Hornblower did not have, which appears periodically, but still, it's a very accurate depiction of warfare in the age of wooden warships. And that's a lot of what attracts people both to the Hornblower books, the the Aubrey Madison books that, oh Christ, I'm blanking on his name.
Patrick O'Brien.
Patrick O'Brien
Brian,
wrote,
that's it, yeah.
and so forth. As far as characters go, the one difference between what Chuck and I have written and Hornblower is that Hornblower is a fascinating character, but he's got this kind of he's a melancholy fellow. I mean, he's got this kind of self-doubt, and he's a very striking character, but that's not Eddie Cantrell.
Yeah. He's kind of a Child Harold sort.
Yeah.
A Byronic fellow, but both of these men are extremely proactive, and they just go at it and they try to win no matter what. And Eddie just won't give up. That's what's so fun about it. Is
Although it comes from very different places in those two characters. I think Hornblower is very clearly a character from the two books that I read, and then what more I know about the series. He's a creature of his time. He understands that you either do things or you fall by the wayside. There's a I don't want to call him hard-nosed, but there's a sort of determination about him, which is an acknowledgement of the fact that the world doesn't put anything on your plate. And I think that, plus a sense of duty, plus clearly loyalty to and duty to his ship and his shipmates, propels him forward. It's a very military ethos. For all of that, Eddie may be carrying rank, and he may be the closest thing to the other uptime naval officer that the uptimers have brought with them, so to speak. But he's a kid. He's a kid who was a wargaming geek, and he was the only person that, when Simpson said, "Here are the things we've got to do to make this happen," this was the only person who knew what the hell he was talking about. And as Eric said, he rose to that occasion. He fell into this when you get right down to it. Hornblower aimed himself at it. And
there's another difference.
Just to go with that last point about their determination to do things. Eddie is not a Pollyanna, but I think his attitude is sort of, it's more on the level of, if not now, when? If not us, who? And there's a sort of intrinsic, I think, very American optimism, sort of connected to an external proactivity.
That was part one of a two-part interview with Eric Flint and Charles E. Gannon discussing 1637, No Peace Beyond the Line. Part two will be available next week on the podcast. Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization, but the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's League are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
Sir, we just lost Mycroft. How? The single-word question sounded preposterously calm in McAvoy's own ears, and Dunstan Myers shook her head. I don't know, sir. We just lost the FTL feed from the master platforms. They were about— Excuse me, ma'am. Captain Chasnikov, one of Dunstan Myers' assistants, said. What? The ops officer half-snapped. Ma'am, according to Skywatch, some of the Ghost Riders picked up grazer fire right on top of the platforms. Grazer fire? Dunstan Myers repeated. That deep inside the limit? That's what Skywatch says, ma'am, Chasnikov said, and McAvoy and Dunstan Myers looked at one another in shock. Then the CNO shook himself. "Right this minute, how they did it matters a hell of a lot less than the fact that they did it," he snapped. "Block ship impellers to full readiness now. They may adjust position on thrusters, but their wedges do not go active without my order." "Yes, sir." Dunstan Myers nodded sharply, pointing at the comm, and Chasnikov started speaking urgently to Cassandra Defense. "In the meantime, Cheryl," McAvoy went on, "upload the targeting queue directly to the pods." "Sir, that's going to take at least another 13 or 14 minutes. We'll have to start from scratch," Dunstan Myers pointed out. "And without Mycroft, accuracy's going to be poor even for Apollo." "It'll be a hell of a lot better than no accuracy at all," McAvoy grated. "Yes, sir."
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Uncompromising Honor by David Weber. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And a bottle full of warm Westerlies to make for fair sailing, and a couple of Thunder Rolls with mayo and thin sliced corned buffalo meat for sustenance, plus thanks, praise, and gratitude for Eric Flint and Charles E. Gannon, authors of 1637, No Peace Beyond the Line. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.